My Father and the Man in Black. That sounds like it could be the title of Luke Skywalker's autobiography, but in fact it's a documentary by Jonathan Holiff, the son of Saul Holiff, Johnny Cash's manager for 17 years. After his father's death, Jonathan discovered a storage locker full of his papers. It took him 3 attempts to pluck up the courage to look inside, but when he did, he uncovered a treasure trove of letters and telephone recordings. From this extraordinary archive, he's pieced together a very personal memoir of his father's often tempestuous relationship with the country star. Years later, his father committed suicide, which is where the film begins. So what made Jonathan finally venture inside that storage locker?
I decided finally to open the door and go inside, having just come straight from having seen the new movie Walk the Line, which had just opened in theaters. And I realized for the first time watching the film that Johnny was famously arrested the year I was born. And it prompted me to consider whether perhaps I'd been too hard on my father. I hadn't realized just how crazy his life as a consequence was when I came along. And indeed, for the rest of that movie, I found it very difficult to follow the story because it seemed to unlock a floodgate of forgotten or repressed memories. And so it was really that triggered my resolve to open that door and wade into my father's life.
So was there a kind of a therapeutic angle then to this project? I mean, when you were delving in there, was your first thought that this will make a great documentary? Or was it actually that you were more interested in looking at your own past, and then perhaps, the film is something that sprung from that?
Indeed. It was purely a desire to find some peace, some answers. I believe the question that was foremost on my mind was if this was the place that my father had reserved for his most treasured belongings, was my brother and I represented among these things? Would I find anything that he may have kept of myself in that locker? And the answer was no. Those photos would be found later in my mother's care. But it really began as an exercise to exorcise some demons, and I just started taking notes. And one day my mother happened to spot those notes and suggested I write a book, to which I answered, I'm not a writer. But it did not long after become a documentary.
And did you find tackling those issues, I mean, for example, going back to the opening sequence, to dramatise something like that must have been quite difficult for you, just purely because of the personal content of what was being enacted?
Living with this movie is to experience my father's death on an ongoing basis. It took 6.5 years to make the movie. The purpose of taking those notes originally was in order to seek some kind of catharsis. It's something that certainly was a consequence of writing the script. I just had no idea that the movie would mean that I would be living with his ghost for so many years.
And has that catharsis actually worked?
It has. I found great empathy for my father and ultimately forgiveness. Perhaps the most important discovery in the storage locker, of course, was this box full of secretly recorded phone calls with Cash and 60 hours of audio diaries my father kept from the 1960s until shortly before he died. So I had the unprecedented opportunity to meet my father as a man, both before he became my father and after he became my father. And very few children have that luxury. My father, as far as I was concerned as a child, was a two-dimensional authoritarian figure with no emotional life to speak of. And to find how self-aware he was and how tortured he was and how many regrets he had about things I felt that he was oblivious to at that particular time was enlightening and emotional and obviously very healing.
And of course, this is a story not just about your own family, but also the Cash family. Have you had any response from them? Have any members of any of Johnny's relatives seen the film, and have they responded to it at all?
They have seen the film, and perhaps this is a stereotype of we Canadians, but I felt it was a duty to share the movie with the kids, to do so at a time when we had just completed the movie and it started playing on the film festival circuit. And of course, it drove my lawyers crazy. They said, don't do this. You're giving them ammunition. And I just ignored those considerations and felt it important that each of the kids get a copy. And they haven't directly commented on it for, I believe, understandable business considerations. I have been in contact with a number of them, and my feeling is such that they respect the work and that they haven't taken issue with it.
Jonathan Holiff there with his film My Father and the Man in Black.